the point at which Sara Jane Moore kind of enters your life, I guess, not as like this kind of like a mythological or current events sort of figure, but rather as as a person, because it's straight. You lead the film with the declaration that she's going to be the single interviewee in the film, and so I'm curious sort of what that initial encounter was like, and then how you see the choice of her being the one person doing interviews, how you think that kind of shaped the film, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. I think Fog of War had come out, the great Errol Morris film, around that time, maybe a little bit before. For those of you who don't know it, it's Errol Morris talking to, I guess, William McNamara about some of his policies. And, I've always been intrigued by letting somebody, just meeting anybody and hearing their story and not having anybody else chiming in. Just, you meet anybody, you have to make an assessment of who they are, and there are going to be gaps, and you make a judgment, I guess, or a non-judgment of somebody. So I knew that Sara Jane Moore had bad experiences with the press. She had said as much. And Sara Jane always said, I don't want you, talking to my family or people like that. It's not relevant. Really, I'd like it to be my story. And that was fine, as they say, having a constraint is a kind of a good thing, right? It's not just a constraint. It forces you to think about what else you can bring to the table. And so it was not a difficult conversation at all. A matter of fact, I remember that when I first started making films, I made a film about Angeline, who was a Billboard queen she's more than that, but a Billboard queen in Los Angeles. And she too she had some bad press, and she said, I don't want you talking to anybody else. Are you okay with that? Or we can't do the film. So you think to yourself, are we going to be doing a piece of propaganda here, which of course is never the case if you have some editorial control. But you don't want to just, have editorial control. That sounds a little almost sinister. You can take anything somebody says and make it into something different. But I've been used to that with many projects, so it wasn't that different for me. Yeah.
And then from that point, I think this is something that maybe Bob will have some thoughts about. The process of on top of interviewing Sara Jane is also like the research and coming up with or finding the archival materials that comprise like a big chunk of the film. Can you tell us a little bit about how that played out?
Sure. When I started working with Rob, we had different ideas of how we could use Sara Jane's interviews and how we could frame it. And what stuck was to put it in the frame of the history of the time, because we always wanted the film to relate to the present time without going into present politics. So, and I was there. I lived in San Francisco from 1967 to 1978, so I knew the politics of that time there. I always thought it was so similar to now, that so little had changed in 50 years. I was amazed. So coming up with the archival footage that would augment what Sara Jane was saying and help understand really how she changed, what she was exposed to that led to her conversion sort of to radical mindset. It was an interesting thing to do, and I think it was the right thing to do. And Rob and I were just talking about how we may not have, we previously talked about focusing more on the psychological, but I thought, it was too insular, and we should probably make it a little broader than that.
Yeah, and then I'm curious, like when you're in the process of interviewing her, for one thing, I want to hear from you and Sean about the striking way in which you filmed these interviews with her, which they're very like composition forward, I would say, in like in a way that's really nice, I think, for the viewer. But it's also like, I'm just sort of curious what she was like, both on the one hand, just sort of as a person who's recounting things from her life to you, but then also as like and this is where the sort of the Lee Strasberg actor studio dimension of things, as a performer. Because I assume to some degree you were like directing her almost as like an actress.
Yeah, for sure. As anybody who's made films know that it's really the DP, and if the DP has a good bedside manner, you're set, because the director comes and says, "Sit here. We want you to stand behind this glass and speak through the glass, and we're going to be out here." And then I leave, and then Sean, being the very talented, extremely talented DP, but also what makes him a great DP is he's a very kind, gentle person, friendly person. And I'm just curious, because you get to hear, you say, "Sara, you can just move gently over. How are you?" You have that rapport while I'm not always back by the monitor, but you were right there with her. Yeah, I'd love you to talk about that.
Well, I think Sara Jane says it in the film. You're two, maybe three people. And she was super soft and super gentle and super kind, super nice. And then we turned on the camera, and that changed, not always, but sometimes. But my recollection was she was really easy to work with. She'd move over an inch, do whatever. She was a joy. Really.
But so what did you think about, you've shot a lot of great documentaries over 20 years. What did you think about putting, a subject, so to speak, a person we're filming, in certain strange situations that are not just talking heads? Did you feel like this is a little bit strange for the subject, or what were your thoughts on some of the setups?
Did I give you that question? No, I think that's a great point. Rob and I had somewhat recently, a couple years earlier, made a documentary that was entirely recreations. So there are no real interviews other than auditory interviews. And so, when you have a subject such as Sara Jane Moore, where a very singular subject to the film, obviously interviewing her on camera is an important, very important thing. But one of the things that I think was kind of a directive coming down from Rob, for sure, and one of the reasons I've continued to make films with Rob over the years, is that we had to find some new way to do that. And obviously a lot of documentaries might put her in a room and just a regular room, light it really well, and that would be the main interview. But here we were trying to push it farther, and I think kind of what we were doing, although I'm not sure I was completely conscious of it at the time, was we were doing recreations as we did the interviews in a weird way. So she's in the car in San Francisco, she's in the Borgia room, which is the room that she's brought into after the assassination attempt. I think that's one of the proudest things visually that we did in the film, is that we sort of imbued those, or we married those two things together. And as a filmmaker, as a documentarian, although I do both narrative and documentaries, and another reason I love Rob is that he does want to break the form. He wants to challenge the form all the time, and there's a lot of discussion about that. And I think it was a trip to San Francisco. You and Matt went down when we knew we were going to shoot. There was a previous idea, maybe, and you did some location scouting, and you were sending me back a bluff and a hotel and a side of the street, and we were like, okay, there's where we interview her with a car.
It was that we were the things we were sending you initially were just boring. That's
Yes.
really what it was.
Yeah, initially, yeah.
And just to be clear, when were you interviewing her? Because I'm sure people, you've probably heard this, but people have been compelled, I'm sure, to look her up, and they see she's 94. She doesn't seem 94 in the film. And she was paroled in 2010 or something?
I think 2008.
2008. Okay. So then sort of when do these interviews take place? I'll start there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they took place a year after she was released from prison, and another year after that. 5 days in San Francisco, another 3 days in San Francisco, and then 3 days in New York City for audio. How did all those years go by since then?
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to ask about, because I think you all could probably speak to this sort of the process of in the intervening time organizing the material so that it takes shape into the film.
I think that when we first looked at this material, I think we were a little bit worried. I was, and I think we took a crack at it, and it was not easy to put together. I think that we, for a long time, were worried how we would create a rhythm that would break up Sara Jane, if she's the only person there. I mean, there are great one-person documentaries, right? Barbe Schroeder, Charles Bukowski, or, Portrait of Jason, or Fog of War. It's kind of incredible to have a documentary that just allows you to watch one person. But because we had her in these kind of stylized locations, and because the story was so complex, there were major holes. And I think we struggled with this for a long time, and I think only until, various people were hoping to do different things with the project, and, we went through a whole, the documentary world. There's a time, when people were ready to maybe put a budget of $2 or $3 million into documentaries, and then the business, the whole model tanked, and then people came out of it and it was like, well, you can't really film any, the budgets are $200,000, which is fine. I mean, we weren't spending a lot of money, but I think it was a difficult thing to figure out rhythmically. Adam Sekuler, who is not here, is a person I've worked with who is a mentor to me. He helped us work on Powwow, which was, a documentary that we had at Art of the Real in 2017. And that film helped me a little bit mature as just the rhythmic aspect. So, and then until Bob came involved, until we had a very dense amount of archival material that we could take a breather from her talking. She's a strong and sometimes strident. So, you can't really take that too much. Matter of fact, I still think the film needs a little breathing space. But so until we had that rich content, we couldn't get it. And I think then it was kind of sitting there, and then once certain things started happening, politically, and some of the parallels became even more pronounced on the left and on the right, in the past 7-8 years, it was like we've got to like refocus. It just took a long time.
Jason or Bob, do you have any thoughts on this process of sort of reorganizing things? And I imagine this is kind of like what we think of as the writing of the film, right? Is figuring out how everything hangs together.
It's really interesting. It is the writing of the film, and you have a core amount of material, and then you've got to figure out how are you going to put this together and make it into a coherent, interesting, relevant film. And it's just a lot of trial and error and finding things and seeing what will work and where. And I mean, we had so much interview material, and there's such a long story with Sara Jane that we also had to decide, no, we're going to focus on these years, just these years, not her whole life. And as a
her
former
breaking out of prison is in the
psychiatrist,
credits.
as a former psychiatrist, I wanted to focus on her whole life because, that's what I did all my life, is focus on people's whole lives. But, it's just an amazingly interesting and time-consuming and difficult process.
Yeah, when I got involved was, basically at the beginning of the year, but these guys have been working for a number of years, just, throwing everything at it, like all different forms of the interviews, all different kinds of archival. And I had this huge sort of onboarding process in like the beginning of the year where I was really getting my head around the story. I mean, it was so complicated and there were so many different kinds of archival they were using. And I really think my role has been to kind of, make the film more accessible, make it more understandable, and like, really like figure out like how to get this archival, like this wealth of archival footage wrangled into a form where it could be presented in an environment like this. And I can't tell you how many edits have happened even just in the days leading up to this, where we're swapping in and out archival footage and things moving all around to different parts. I mean, we always wanted things like Attica and Allende and things to be in there, but they were in a totally different form back in June with how they were presented here tonight. The same core elements of these events that were in there, but the way they were being presented was constantly shifting all the way till the end.
Yeah, and I would just add, for sure, there's always a pressure, I think, with documentary filmmakers, not a pressure, but a relief of pressure to think, we're going to do some recreations, we'll do some animation, we'll do something to give us this break. And, recreations and things like that they're not cheap, and nor is animation. And so, it's also a matter of trying to, we were working for a long time with basically no money, and it was another reason is it takes to get the archival material, to license that, it just takes time to fundraise and do all that and present something decent that somebody would be interested. So it took a lot of time.
Yeah. Maybe I'll ask one more thing and we'll see if the audience has any questions. I mean, obviously the last thing I want to know is what does Sara Jane think of the film?
So Sara Jane had been in contact with me all year and had asked to see the film, and I was, very nervous about it because, I really, I feel very, at peace with myself, trying to work hard to do right by her. Of course, I had some things that I have an issue with, but I never wanted to show it to her, before it was ready. And so she was asking me a couple times this year, send me the film. And I said, I'm not quite ready, but soon. And then we found out we got into the New York Film Festival, which was very exciting news. And it actually made me feel like, well, this is, maybe validate, this is good news for her too. And so we sent her a long letter, an email that, same email that she's been contacting me on. And we said, let's talk about how we can show this to you. And we didn't get a response. And we still have not gotten a response. And we thought she might be here, tonight. But when the assassination attempt happened against Trump, there she was on television in Nashville, Tennessee. And I think that she had other projects going on. I know she did. She had a project going on with like the news producer of that station, because she said so and then her son-in-law from her last marriage to a man in Tennessee had contacted me prior, but no word. And we were ready to. We asked Dennis, and we said, "How do you feel about Sara Jane coming?" And he was like, "Well, maybe we should, concentrate on cinema." And I was like, but anyway,
we would have welcomed her.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a couple questions from the audience. Start right here. No, it's just a question about, I guess, Rob's sense of the veracity of Sara Jane's, what she's putting down throughout the film.
Yeah, asking how did we feel kind of about this? Did we feel that it was a lot of tall tales? And what does that mean when you're doing a documentary and you're not having somebody corroborating or somebody challenging, right? Very difficult. Really difficult, because there are people like Popeye Jackson who she's speaking about that, you have to bring something else in to give a counterbalance to that. And I think that, Bob has said, when doing his research, and he was always researching, that he never, found anything that was a lie per se. I do feel that, and I would say this to Sara Jane, that Sara Jane, she was somebody who was aligned with, worked in offices of politicians. Some of this stuff is not in the movie, but she had volunteered for a senator who was a very right-wing senator. She'd also had worked in a office in San Francisco for the left, a poverty movement. And she was as you saw in the pin stuff, she was somebody who was able to be a liaison with the press. And it was my feeling, and this is what psychiatrists have said, is that she was very sharp, and also hung around a lot of people in Los Angeles. She was very good about answering exactly what you asked. If you were, a few degrees off from your question, she said it. Remember, the Secret Service, they said, "Were you going down to assassinate Ford?" And she said, No, I was going down to, look at what the security was like, because I was curious, blah, blah, blah. So she, I think she's very smart, like a politician is, to not, she can be at peace with herself. I can't speak for her, but I think she's at peace answering a question, and maybe gets a little charge from it, from answering it in a way that you asked it. So if I'm asking a question, it's not saying, because honestly, to be totally honest, I didn't have the guts. When you meet somebody and I'm not a 60 Minutes reporter, at all, and I'm trying to develop a rapport with somebody I've never met, I should have said, did you spread rumors about Popeye Jackson the way the FBI had spread rumors about Martin Luther King, for instance? Did you play a role in his death? I didn't specifically ask that. The research that we found, corroborates that she did. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's a tricky part of it.
Actually, but that touches on one of my favorite parts of the film, when she draws this distinction between important and unimportant information. When you're like, I think you're pressing her about the particulars of when she's like informing on people, basically, totally. She's going back and looking at what she told her FBI control person, and she's like, yeah, but I told him all this stuff that didn't matter. And then you're like, but no, it very obviously did.
Thank God I press her a little bit, but yeah, that's exactly it. She'd say, no, there's just normal things that people, but yeah, I think when you get a look at something, human instinct is to look for the dicey details, right? The prurient stuff, the madness. It's the way any press exploits anything, right? The sex, the broken marriages, all that stuff. And we spent a long time trying to develop a first act that dealt with her marriages, her children that she had, that the press would say that she abandoned, but what about her husband? Her husband also abandoned these children. But she always said, these are irrelevant details. Don't ask us about this because don't ask me about this because it's just not relevant and I'm not going to go there. So of course we were, more interested, and we did all this research and we learned a lot about stuff. But she was right. It wasn't relevant at all. Actually, it was a beautiful kind of thing. But I will say that her son, has really stuck in our heads, and everybody said the son, that she raised, that you see a picture of, that she's mentioned, was this, beautiful, nice kid who was always happy, joined her all the time around, like, when she was getting death threats and sitting in theaters, and he was an innocent kid. I would love, of course I'm curious about him, but, no need to unturn that stone too much, but that was certainly somebody I was curious about.
All right. Anyone else?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Just, watching the film, having worked on this film for so long and seeing it in all its different forms, watching it on the screen and hearing it, it's beautiful. It's amazing how it's come together. But I think we have to call out, there's 4 of us up here. There's an incredible number of people who worked on this film who deserve an incredible amount of admiration, respect, and thanks for all the work they did. And pulling it together, Jason's been amazing, and we couldn't have done it without D.T. Wigley.
Our executive
and
producer.
You have small independent films.
Keep naming them.
That are really, underfunded. And Rob and I would sit there. He said, we had virtually no money. We were like begging for money just to keep going, and people invest in films, but these kind of films, you don't think you're ever going to see any money back. It's a donation, basically, and it's a supporting of the arts.
Yeah.
And when you have people who come forward and help you do that and make it possible, it's amazing.
For sure, and Matt Leventhal, our co-producer, was spinning up the drives for years, like telling me, Rob, you haven't even, spun up this drive, and so shout out, and Paul Matthew Moore, our great composer, I think did one of the greatest synth scores of all time. So many people have traveled to New York to be here, so yeah, for sure.
Well, and it was just such an effort to put this together. Over the last few months in particular, and everybody was working around the clock. I'm not even kidding. These are 16, 18, 20-hour days, sometimes 24-hour days, and just to be swapping in the amount of art. The whole movie was edited in 720p until like a month or two ago, and we upgraded the entire film to 4K. What's incredible about what Sean and Rob did, they shot these interviews in 2010 on one of the early Reds in 4K. The fact that the footage is that old, and we were able to upgrade it to the level of, modern technology for cinemas is amazing. But yeah, the effort that everybody put in to bring this across the finish line on such a short timeline. These guys were all saying, we want this out before the election. And there was a certain point in July, right before the New York Film Festival hit us up, where we'd all resigned. It's not going to come out before the election. There's no way we can even humanly finish this before January 2025. Then we get the email, and we're like, all right, Dennis, the last possible date that we can screen, we need every last second. Sure enough, it was just in the middle of the night last weekend, or just a few days ago, that we finished the film. So
I love it when a plan comes together. But why don't we leave it there for now? Thank all of you so much for the
Thanks,
film.
Dan.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming out.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.